Why did the question hang in the air longer than the explosions outside? The hangar shook as if the desert itself were trying to claw its way inside. Dust fell from the beams. The smell of fuel and hot metal burned the back of every throat. Men crouched behind crates that wouldn't stop much more than shrapnel, fingers tight around rifles they'd already used too much tonight. Outside, the sky pulsed red. Tracer fire stitched lines through the darkness like veins torn open. The voice came again, rough and hoarse. "Anyone here know how to fly?" No one answered. Not because they were afraid. Because the truth didn't give them anything to say. They were ground men, breachers, snipers, medics, fighters who understood dirt and blood in close distances. The last aircraft on the base sat half-hidden at the far end of the tarmac, old and wounded and never meant to be here this long. Everyone knew what it could do. Everyone also knew what was waiting beyond the perimeter. In the corner of the hangar, beneath a flickering work light, a woman straightened slowly. She hadn't been part of the briefing. She hadn't been on the roster taped to the wall. Her sleeves were stained with grease, her hands still shaking from hours spent under the aircraft keeping a fuel line alive that no one thought would matter. She hadn't spoken all night. When she stood, it wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, deliberate. A few heads turned, most didn't. The captain finally noticed her movement. His eyes narrowed, more irritation than hope. "You got something to add, Sergeant?" Her heartbeat thudded once, then settled. "I can fly." A laugh cut through the hangar, short, sharp, nervous. Someone muttered something about mechanics and miracles. She didn't react. She learned long ago that disbelief burned itself out faster than anger. The captain stepped closer, searching her face. "Say that again." "I can fly," she repeated, calm, even, like she was stating the time. For a moment, no one spoke. Outside, a mortar landed close enough to rattle tools off a bench. The hangar lights flickered, threatening darkness. The captain exhaled, background. She hesitated, just enough to feel it. 214th Fighter Wing, she said, "before I got grounded." Grounded, not discharged, not broken, just redirected. That word carried weight. It always had. The captain studied her longer this time. "You get one shot." She nodded once. No smile, no thanks, just acceptance. Because deep down, she wasn't afraid of failing in the air. She was afraid of what it would mean if she succeeded. What kind of person walks toward a burning aircraft when everyone else is counting minutes? The wind howled through the torn hangar doors as she crossed the tarmac. Each step felt louder than it should have. The A-10 waited in the shadows, scarred and stubborn, its faded shark mouth chipped by heat and time. It looked tired, like something that had already survived too much. She placed a hand against its fuselage. Still warm, still breathing. Behind her the men watched, some with doubt, some with something closer to hope which frightened them more. Hope had betrayed them before. She climbed into the cockpit, the smell hitting her instantly, oil-scorched wiring, metal fatigue. Familiar, uncomfortable, honest. Her hands hovered over the controls. Muscle memory stirred, half asleep but intact. She moved carefully, respectfully, as if the aircraft could sense impatience. Battery, fuel, oxygen. The systems protested, then responded. Outside, the engines coughed, sputtered, and finally roared awake, a sound so violent it felt like resurrection. Heat washed over the tarmac. Men shielded their faces. Someone swore. Someone else laughed, breathless. Inside the cockpit, she closed her eyes for half a second. Not a prayer. A reminder. You've done this before. You can do it again. The radio crackled. "You ready?" She looked down the runway. Too short, too damaged, too late. "Yes," she said. And for the first time that night, the word meant something. What does fear sound like when it locks onto you? It screamed. A high, merciless tone drilling into her skull as warning lights bloomed red across the panel. The enemy radar had found her, a missile system waking up somewhere below, hungry and precise. She dropped low, hugging the terrain so close the sand blurred into streaks of gold and black. The aircraft shuddered beneath her, complaining loudly, like an old soldier being asked for one last fight. The missile launched. On the ground, someone shouted. Someone else stopped breathing. She didn't panic. Panic wasted time. Panic told stories she didn't have room to hear. She rolled, dumped flares, cut throttle, then surged forward again, using heat and confusion and instinct sharpened by years she wasn't supposed to talk about. The missile followed, persistent, smarter than the last. "Come on," she whispered, not to the missile but to herself. She dove toward fire, toward chaos, toward a place where logic broke down and survival had a chance. The explosion lit the night like a second sun. Silence followed. Then breath returned. "I'm still here," she said into the radio. On the ground, men stared at the sky like they were seeing something holy. How much can a person give before there's nothing left to take? The aircraft was dying. Fuel bleeding away, hydraulics screaming, controls fighting her like they wanted rest more than victory. Smoke trailed behind her like a confession. Below, the enemy regrouped. Above, dawn threatened to break. She had one run left. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from exhaustion she'd been ignoring for hours. She thought of the nights she'd spent grounded, watching others fly, wondering if her purpose had expired quietly without telling her. She lined up the shot. The cannon spun. The sound tore the desert open. When it was over, there was nothing left to fire. No ammo, no strength, just altitude and a runway that might forgive her. "Pull back," the captain ordered. "Not yet," she said, almost done. She turned toward home. What does landing feel like when the plane doesn't want to live anymore? Like wrestling memory itself. She cut power. The runway rushed toward her. Impact slammed through her spine as metal screamed and sparks lit the ground like falling stars. The aircraft slid, veered, fought, then finally stopped, exhausted. For a moment, there was only smoke. Then the canopy opened. She climbed out on shaking legs, dropped her helmet, and stood there breathing air that tasted like survival. No cheers came, just silence, respectful, heavy. The captain approached slowly. "You saved us." She looked back at the aircraft. It did most of the work. He nodded because he understood what she meant. Why do some stories never make it into reports? Because they weren't meant for paper. Weeks later, the base moved on. Repairs were made. Names were counted. The aircraft sat in a hangar, patched but scarred, a section left untouched. Memory, they called it. She walked the runway alone at sunset, hand brushing the cool metal of the plane that had carried her back to herself. Still flying, she thought. Not in the air, but in purpose. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did her hands feel steadier now than they ever had in the sky before? The moment the canopy sealed shut, the world narrowed to breath and sound. Outside, chaos dulled into vibration. Inside the cockpit, it became intimate. Every click of a switch, every tremor in the airframe, every memory her body had been carrying without permission. Mara Jensen let her forehead rest briefly against the helmet padding. Just a second, not weakness, calibration. She hadn't sat in the seat in 2 years. Not since the report. Not since the word grounded had quietly replaced pilot in her file. The cockpit lights flickered like they were unsure whether to trust her. She trusted them anyway. Her fingers moved automatically, checking systems in an order her mind no longer had to ask for. Battery, fuel pressure, oxygen, hydraulic response, sluggish but alive. Alive mattered. Outside, the engines roared, a violent sound that rattled teeth and bones. Men scattered instinctively, some ducking, some starring. The old A-10 shook like it was remembering what it had been built for, like it resented being woken up this way but welcomed it too. Mara exhaled slowly. She could feel eyes on her even through the steel and glass. She knew what they were thinking. Mechanic, last resort, mistake. She'd worn worse labels. The radio crackled. "You've got 90 seconds before the perimeter gives," the captain said. His voice was firm, but it carried something underneath now. Not doubt, calculation. "Copy," she replied. "I won't need all of them." The word surprised even her. She eased the throttle forward. The engines responded unevenly, like tired legs stretching after too long still. The nose of the aircraft vibrated. Warning tones chirped, then settled. She glanced down the runway. Too short. Too damaged. Too many memories of aborted takeoffs and worse landings. Her jaw tightened. This wasn't the kind of flying she trained for. No clean airspace. No tower clearance. No margin for error. This was improvisation layered on desperation. She preferred it that way. The radio clicked again. Someone else this time. Younger, nervous. "Ma'am, you sure about this?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she remembered the day she'd been grounded. No explosion. No dramatic crash. Just a hydraulic failure over Kandahar, a plane that limped home, and a board that decided she'd hesitated too long before ejecting. They'd called it questionable judgment under pressure. She'd called it wanting to save the aircraft. They never asked why. "I'm sure," she said finally. She released the brakes. The A-10 surged forward, tires screaming against broken asphalt. Fire and sand exploded behind her. Tracer rounds stitched the darkness ahead, red lines reaching up like fingers trying to pull her back down. The runway disappeared faster than it should have. Her heart slammed once, then slowed. At the end of the strip, she pulled. The aircraft hesitated, heavy, wounded, reluctant. For a fraction of a second, she felt the old fear creep in, the quiet voice that said this is where it ends. Then lift. The wheels left the ground just as an explosion tore through the hangar behind her. The shockwave rocked the aircraft sideways. Alarms screamed. She fought the controls, muscles burning as she forced the nose up. "Widow 13 airborne," she said, voice clipped professional, like she'd never stopped flying. On the ground, men stared upward. Some shouted, some laughed. One crossed himself without realizing it. The sky swallowed her. Up there, the desert looked different, less personal, still violent but distant. Fires burned like scattered stars. The enemy convoy stretched across the flats, armored vehicles moving with purpose, confident in their numbers. Her HUD lit up red. Missile lock. The sound was immediate and intimate, a high-pitched scream that bypassed reason and went straight to the spine. Her fingers tightened on the stick. "So that's how you want to start," she muttered. She dropped altitude hard, pushing the aircraft down until the ground rushed up in a blur of sand and shadow. The Warthog protested, rattling violently. She ignored it. Terrain was cover. Speed was armor. The missile launched. On the ground, someone yelled into a radio. The captain barked orders she couldn't hear. She banked left, dumped flares. Bright magnesium ghosts exploded behind her, lighting the sky in violent orange. The missile hesitated, then corrected. "Persistent," she whispered. Her breathing stayed shallow, controlled. Panic wasted oxygen. She dove again, skimming so low her altimeter screamed warnings she didn't bother silencing. 50 feet, 40, 30. The missile closed in, relentless. Her ribs ached as G-forces pressed her into the seat. The aircraft groaned like an animal being pushed past its limits. She tasted metal. Then she saw it. A burning fuel depot ahead, still raging from earlier strikes. Heat shimmered the air above it, warping vision and signal alike. She smiled tight, grim. "All right," she said softly, "let's make a mess." She rolled inverted, dove straight toward the fire, then cut throttle at the last possible second. Dumped every flare she had left. Pulled up hard, muscles screaming as she fought gravity and momentum. The missile followed the heat. Too much heat. It disappeared into the blaze. The explosion cracked the night open. The shockwave slammed into her aircraft, throwing her sideways. Alarms erupted. Warning lights bloomed across the panel like a disease. She fought the stick, teeth clenched, forcing the aircraft level. "I'm still here," she said into the radio, breathless now, honest. A pause, then the captain's voice, quieter than before. "Copy that. You just bought us time." Time. She looked back at the enemy convoy, already shifting, adapting. They weren't done. Neither was she. Fuel was lower than she liked. Ammo finite. The aircraft bleeding in places she didn't want to think about. She felt the weight of it then. Not fear, but responsibility. Every decision up here echoed below. Every second she stayed airborne meant someone else got to breathe longer. She keyed the radio. "Mark me a corridor east of your position, 200 meters. "Corridor marked," the captain replied. "You sure you want to come in that close?" "No," she said, "but I'm coming anyway." She lined up the run. The cannon spun. The sound wasn't loud so much as absolute. A tearing, grinding roar that felt like the sky itself was being unzipped. Tracer rounds stitched the ground, ripping through armored trucks, turning confidence into fire and confusion. From below, it looked like judgment. From above, it felt like obligation. She pulled up at the last second, aircraft shuddering violently. Smoke trailed behind her now, thick and dark. The left wing vibrated under stress. Hydraulics dipped again. She noticed it all, filed it away. There would be time to feel later. On the ground, men shouted. Some laughed, some cried. None of them looked away. Above them, Mara Jensen circled once more, battered aircraft cutting a dark line across the burning sky. She wasn't thinking about medals. She was thinking about the names she didn't want added to the wall. And she wasn't done yet. What do you do when the sky turns against you, and there's still work left below? The warning tones didn't stop screaming this time. They layered over each other, sharp and overlapping, until the cockpit felt less like a machine and more like a body in distress. Fuel pressure dropping, hydraulics unstable, engine temperature climbing past the line she'd sworn never to cross again. Mara Jensen didn't curse. She didn't pray. She breathed. Slow in. Slower out. Panic was loud. Control was quiet. She chose quiet. Below her, the desert was no longer just terrain. It was a chessboard that refused to stay still. The convoy she'd torn open was regrouping, fragments pulling back toward a mobile radar unit already spinning up again. They learned fast. Survival demanded it. Her HUD flickered. Another lock warning blinked amber. Not yet, she thought. Don't you dare be ready yet. She wiped sweat from her brow with the back of her glove. The movement left a smear of grime across the inside of her visor. She didn't bother clearing it. Vision was overrated. Instinct was. The radio crackled. "Widow 13 status." Captain Donovan's voice came through, steady but strained. She could hear gunfire behind him now, closer, louder. She scanned her panels. Numbers meant less when everything was wrong. "I'm bleeding fuel and patience," she said, "but I can still fight." A pause, then softer. "You've already done more than." "Don't," she cut in, not harsh, just firm. "Don't tell me I've done enough, not yet." She rolled the aircraft gently, testing response. The right aileron lagged. The left answered with a tremor that ran through the entire wing. The Warthog was tired. So was she. For a moment, doubt slipped in. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet one. The one that asked reasonable questions. What if this is where it ends? What if coming back was a mistake? She shoved the thought aside. Mistakes were quieter than this. The radar tone screamed again. "There you are." She banked hard, dropping altitude until the ground rushed up, close enough to count shadows. Tracer fire reached for her, red lines snapping past the canopy. She felt one strike the fuselage, a dull, heavy thud that vibrated through the seat. "Easy," she whispered, to the plane, to herself. The missile launched. This one was faster, smarter. Its guidance tone flattened into a single, relentless scream that pressed against her skull like a vice. On the ground, the SEALs saw it rise. Someone shouted. Someone else stopped firing without realizing it. Mara pushed the throttle forward. The engines coughed in protest, then surged, heat ripping through the air behind her. She dumped flares, bright, blinding, desperate. The missile ignored them. Her jaw tightened. "All right," she said quietly, "then we do this the hard way." She angled toward the mirage line, the place where heat bent light and truth alike. The desert shimmered ahead, a wavering horizon that confused sensors and eyes. She dove straight into it, cutting power at the last possible moment. The aircraft shuddered violently. Alarms screamed louder, angrier. The missile followed. She waited. Too long for comfort. Too short for regret. Then she fired. Not at the missile. At the ground. Both remaining rockets tore into the sand ahead, detonating in a wall of fire and debris. The desert erupted, heat blooming outward in a violent, chaotic wave. The missile plunged into it, logic overwhelmed by its own hunger. The explosion tore the night open. The shockwave slammed into the A-10, throwing Mara forward against her harness. Pain flared across her chest. The cockpit filled with smoke. Warning lights went berserk. She coughed, eyes stinging, fingers still locked on the controls. "Still here," she rasped, not bothering with the radio yet. She needed to hear it herself first. When she finally keyed the mic, her voice was rough but steady. "Missile neutralized." On the ground, a cheer broke loose before anyone could stop it. Donovan slammed his fist against a crate, relief punching through exhaustion. But the cost came fast. Fuel levels plummeted. The left engine sputtered, then steadied at a lower pitch that set her teeth on edge. Hydraulics dipped again, flirting with zero. She knew that sound. The sound of a machine, deciding how much longer it was willing to try. "Widow 13, Donovan said, urgency bleeding through now. "You're leaking fuel, you need to pull back." She looked down at the convoy. What was left of it? Vehicles burning, radar unit damaged but not dead, men scrambling, trying to re-establish order under fire. If she left now, they'd recover, regroup, come back harder. She thought of the hangar, the wounded, the men who'd believed her just enough to let her try. "No," she said, quiet, certain, "one more pass." "Mara," he stopped himself, swallowed, "you don't have the margin." "I never did," she replied. "I just learned how to live without it." She lined up for the final run. The cannon indicator blinked low, barely a third of a drum left, not enough for precision, enough for intent. As she descended, she felt the fatigue finally seep into her bones. The kind that came from holding yourself together too long. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of restraint finally cracking. She welcomed it. This was where it counted. The ground rushed up. Tracer fire snapped past the canopy, sparks flashing as rounds skipped off the armor plating. She could see faces now, small, human, terrified. She didn't hate them. She just couldn't let them pass. The cannon spun. The sound ripped through the air, raw and unforgiving. Metal tore apart. Vehicles bloomed into fire. Shockwaves rolled across the desert like a held breath finally released. The aircraft vibrated violently, protesting the strain. Warning tones screamed. The left engine coughed again, smoke thickening behind her. She pulled up hard, coaxing the wounded machine skyward with every ounce of strength she had left. The cannon fell silent. "Empty," She exhaled slowly, hands shaking now openly. "That's it," she whispered. "That's all I've got." Below her the convoy was gone, not scattered, gone. Fire and wreckage marked where momentum had once lived. On the ground the seals stared in stunned silence. Someone laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. Someone else dropped to a knee, suddenly aware their legs had been holding too much. Donovan removed his helmet, eyes tracking the smoking silhouette limping across the sky. "She did it," he said softly. "She actually did it." Up in the cockpit, Mara felt the adrenaline finally drain away, leaving behind pain and cold and a creeping awareness of how close she was to the edge. Fuel nearly gone, controls sluggish, one engine singing a song she didn't like. She turned west. Home was a suggestion now, not a guarantee. She keyed the radio one more time. "Base actual, convoy neutralized. I'm coming back on fumes." A pause, then Donovan's voice, steady but thick. "Runway's yours, we'll be ready." She nodded, even though he couldn't see it. As the desert stretched beneath her, quiet now except for distant fires, Mara Jensen let herself feel it. Not pride. Relief. Relief that the question she'd been asked in the hangar had finally been answered, not with words, but with action. And relief that she might still get the chance to land. If the sky allowed it. What does it feel like to realize the machine is no longer fighting for you, but with you? The first thing Mara Jensen noticed was the silence. Not the absence of sound. There was still wind tearing past the canopy, alarms chirping weakly, the low, uneven growl of a single engine, but the absence of urgency. The sky no longer hunted her. No radar tones. No tracer fire climbing to meet her. Just distance. Just consequences catching up. She glanced at the fuel gauge. Empty wasn't a warning anymore. It was a fact. The left engine sputtered again, a coughing, uneven rhythm that vibrated through the airframe and into her bones. The right was gone completely, a dead weight she carried out of stubbornness rather than utility. "Widow 13, say again your status." Captain Donovan's voice cut through the static, quieter now, but tight with something that wasn't command. Mara rolled her shoulders, trying to work life back into them. Pain bloomed across her chest where the harness had slammed her forward earlier. Her breath came shallow. She ignored it. "One engine," she said. "Barely. Controls are negotiable. Gear not responding." There was a pause on the line, long enough for her to imagine the men below looking at each other, doing the math they didn't want to say out loud. "We've cleared the strip," Donovan said finally. "Emergency flares, foam trucks standing by." She almost smiled. They were preparing to catch a falling thing. "Copy," she replied. "I'll try not to miss." As the base came into view, it looked smaller than she remembered. Less like a fortress, more like a fragile collection of lights clinging to sand and hope. Smoke drifted lazily upward, remnants of a night that refused to be forgotten. She adjusted her approach angle, fighting the controls inch by inch. The A-10 responded slowly, like an animal too tired to be startled anymore. Every movement was a negotiation now. No sharp inputs, no impatience. "Easy, easy." She thought about the first time she'd landed solo. The instructor's voice in her headset. The way her hands had trembled even then. The way she'd been sure everyone could see through her, waiting for her to fail. She'd been afraid of the wrong thing back then. Now fear felt manageable. The runway lined up beneath her, scarred and uneven, illuminated by flares that burned red against the encroaching dawn. Men stood well clear, silhouettes frozen, watching her descent like it was something sacred. "Altitude?" Donovan asked. "Dropping," she answered, "fast." The aircraft shuddered as turbulence grabbed at it, pushing her offline. She corrected gently, muscles screaming in protest. The left engine coughed again, threatening to quit. "Stay with me," she murmured, "just a little longer." The landing gear indicator stayed dark. "No gear," she said calmly. "I'm going to slide it in." Another pause. "Understood," Donovan replied. "We're with you." That mattered more than it should have. At 70 feet, she cut what little power she had left. The nose dipped, the ground rushed up, time stretched thin and brittle. Impact. The sound was violent, metallic, final. The aircraft slammed onto the runway belly first, sparks erupting in a screaming cascade as steel met concrete. Her teeth rattled. Pain flared white-hot through her spine. She fought the instinct to freeze. Hands active. Feet steady. Eyes forward. The aircraft skidded, veering left, dragging fire behind it. The broken wing scraped, sending showers of sparks into the air. The cannon housing tore into the runway, gouging deep scars that smoked and burned. She wrestled the controls, pulling with everything she had left. The A-10 resisted, then slowly, grudgingly straightened. Momentum bled away. The world narrowed to friction and breath. Then, with a shuddering sigh that felt almost human, the aircraft stopped. Silence rushed in. Not empty silence. Earned silence. Smoke curled up around the cockpit, thick and gray. Flames licked at the edges of the wings, hungry but contained. Foam trucks roared in, white spray cutting through the smoke like snowfall in hell. Mara sat there for a moment longer than necessary. Not frozen. Listening. Her heart hammered in her chest, loud and uneven. Her hands trembled openly now. She let them. When the canopy finally creaked open, the smell of scorched metal and foam flooded in. Cool air hit her face, shocking in its gentleness. She unstrapped slowly, carefully. Her muscles protested every movement. She swung her legs over the side and dropped to the tarmac, knees buckling for half a second before she caught herself. Someone shouted her name. Someone else shouted for a medic. She waved them off with a tired hand. "Give me a second." Captain Donovan approached, helmet tucked under his arm, eyes locked on her like he wasn't sure she was real yet. He stopped a few feet away, respect keeping him at distance. "You just landed a dead aircraft," he said quietly. She exhaled a shaky laugh. "It wasn't dead," she replied, "just stubborn." He looked past her at the ruined A-10, foam clinging to its scorched skin, smoke rising like breath in cold air. "So are you," he said. For the first time since the hangar, Mara let herself smile. Not wide, not triumphant. Just real. Around them the base slowly exhaled. Weapons lowered. Men sat where they stood, exhaustion finally allowed to exist. Medics moved through the aftermath, counting breaths instead of rounds. No one cheered. No one needed to. The sky lightened almost imperceptibly, a thin line of gray breaking the black. Dawn didn't arrive loudly. It never did after nights like this. Mara turned back to the aircraft, resting a hand against its cooling fuselage. The metal was warm beneath her palm, scarred and cracked and alive in its own way. "You did good," she whispered. The wind carried the words away, but she didn't need them returned. Behind her, Captain Donovan spoke softly, almost to himself. "When I asked who could fly, I wasn't expecting this." She didn't turn, neither was I. As the first light touched the runway, illuminating every scar carved into concrete and steel, Mara Jensen stood there breathing, alive, grounded again, but this time by choice. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. What happens after the noise fades, when survival finally has time to speak? The sun rose without ceremony. No fanfare, no victory colors splashed across the sky. Just a pale, honest light creeping over the desert, exposing everything the night had hidden. Burned vehicles in the distance, torn fencing, blackened patches of runway where metal had screamed against stone. Mara Jensen sat on the edge of a medical crate, boots dangling above the concrete, hands wrapped around a metal cup that had long gone cold. She hadn't noticed. Her body was still catching up to her. Around her the base moved slowly, carefully, like everyone was afraid that if they moved too fast the night would come back. Medics worked in murmurs. Names were spoken softly, counted once then again. Stretchers passed with deliberate care. The wounded were stabilized, not rushed. No one was pretending anymore. Captain Donovan walked the perimeter with his helmet under his arm, checking positions that no longer mattered. He stopped every few steps, nodding at men who met his eyes, the kind of nod that said we're still here. It was the only report that counted. He noticed Mara sitting alone and hesitated. Not because he didn't want to approach, but because he didn't know what to say to someone who had changed the shape of the night. He finally stepped closer. "Doc says you should be lying down." She shrugged without looking at him. Doc wasn't up there. He smiled despite himself. Then the smile faded. "You saved 27 lives." She flinched. Not visibly, just enough for him to catch it. "That's not how it works," she said quietly. "You don't save numbers, you just don't quit." Donovan leaned against a crate nearby, lowering himself until they were at the same level. For a moment, neither spoke. The desert wind moved around them, carrying the smell of smoke and morning dust. After a while, he said, "They never told me about you." Mara stared at the horizon, where the last fires smoldered like dying stars. "They weren't supposed to." "You were a pilot." "I was," she agreed. "What happened?" She closed her eyes. The question wasn't sharp, it wasn't accusatory, but it touched something that had healed wrong. "Hydraulics failed on approach," she said. "Nothing dramatic. The jet wanted to kill itself more than the enemy ever did. I fought it longer than I should have. And I brought it back," she said. "Barely. Everyone walked away." Donovan frowned. "That doesn't sound like a failure." It looked like hesitation on paper. She finally looked at him then. Her eyes were tired, clear. "They said I'd lost my edge, that I'd chosen the aircraft over the protocol." He didn't answer right away. "Did you?" he asked. "Yes." He nodded slowly. "Then they were wrong." Mara's grip tightened around the cup. They didn't ask why. The silence stretched again, heavy but not uncomfortable. Across the tarmac, a group of SEALs stood near the remains of the A-10. Widow 13 looked smaller now, tilted slightly, foam drying white against scorched gray metal. The shark mouth paint was blistered, the eyes warped by heat, but still defiant. One of the younger operators reached out, stopped himself, then rested his palm against the fuselage like he was touching something sacred. "She shouldn't have flown," someone muttered. "No," another replied, "but she did." Mara watched them from a distance, something in her chest tightening. She hadn't expected that reaction. She hadn't expected anything, really. Just to land, just to breathe. Donovan followed her gaze. "They won't forget tonight." She shook her head slowly. "They shouldn't remember me." He studied her. "Why?" "Because this wasn't about proving something," she said. "It was about standing when it mattered." He let that settle. Later, when the wounded were moved and the perimeter reset, Mara found herself walking the runway alone. Her steps were slow, deliberate, as if she were afraid to wake something. The scars in the concrete were deep, gouges where metal had bitten hard, long black streaks where sparks had lived and died. She traced one with the toe of her boot. So much damage for one landing. She stopped beside Widow 13. Up close the aircraft looked worse, panels warped, rivets exposed, one wing scarred almost beyond recognition, and yet it was still here. Still standing. Mara rested her hand against the fuselage again. This time, the metal was cool. "You weren't wrong," she whispered. "You were just tired." The words surprised her. They weren't about the plane. Behind her, footsteps approached. She didn't turn. I filed the preliminary report, Donovan said gently. I kept it minimal. She smiled faintly. You would. There's no call sign, no citation, no name attached to the airframe. She exhaled. Relief loosened something in her chest she hadn't realized was locked. Thank you. He hesitated. You sure you don't want credit? She shook her head. Credit turns moments into currency. I don't want to spend this one. The sky brightened further, washing the desert in pale gold. The night felt distant now, like a dream that refused to fully release its grip. As the sun climbed, a new group arrived, young pilots, part of a rotation that had been delayed by the siege. Clean uniforms, fresh faces. They moved with that mix of confidence and uncertainty that came before reality set in. One of them stopped short when he saw the damaged A-10. What happened to her? He asked. Mara answered before Donovan could. She did what she was built to do. The pilot frowned. She looks like she barely made it back. Mara met his eyes. That still counts. The young man nodded slowly, absorbing something he didn't yet have words for. Later that afternoon, Donovan sat alone in his office, finishing the final report. He stared at the blank space where a name could go. He left it empty. Instead, he wrote, when asked who could fly, one person stood, not for recognition but because no one else could. He closed the file and set it aside. Outside, Mara Jensen walked the perimeter one last time before leaving the flight line. The desert wind tugged at her sleeves, gentle now, almost kind. She paused at the edge of the runway and looked back once more at Widow 13. The aircraft didn't look heroic. It looked honest. Mara nodded to it, then turned away. For the first time in years, she didn't feel grounded. She felt finished. Not broken. Not erased. Just complete. And sometimes, that's the hardest kind of victory to recognize. What stays with you when the world moves on, but the moment never really leaves. 2 weeks passed the way time often does after survival, quietly, without asking permission. The desert softened. Wind erased some of the tracks. Smoke thinned into memory. The perimeter fences were rebuilt straighter than before, as if symmetry could convince the ground nothing had happened. New schedules were posted. New routines took hold. The base learned how to breathe again. But not everything returned to normal. Inside Hangar 3, Widow 13 rested in a half-circle of scaffolding and work lights. Her shark mouth had been repainted by a crew that worked slower than usual, careful not to erase more than they had to. One section of the right wing remained untouched, blackened, warped, scarred by heat and shrapnel. Someone had suggested sanding it down. Someone else had said quietly, leave it. No one argued. Mara Jensen stood just inside the hangar doorway, hands in her pockets, watching the crew move around the aircraft. She wasn't part of the team assigned to the repair. She hadn't asked to be. She just came by sometimes when the day felt too neat, too quiet. The aircraft looked different in daylight. Smaller, less mythical, more real. Captain Donovan joined her after a moment, clipboard tucked under his arm. He didn't speak right away. Neither did she. Silence had become something they shared comfortably. They're saying she'll fly again, he said finally. Mara nodded. They always do. He glanced at her. Does that bother you? She thought about it, about the night, about the way the engines had screamed like they were tearing themselves apart just to stay alive. No, she said, it would bother me more if she didn't. He smiled faintly. You know, there's still no official explanation for what happened that night. That's good, she replied. Explanations tend to shrink things. Donovan leaned against a crate. The brass thinks it was a pilot who never made it back. They like that version, clean, heroic, finished. And you? He met her eyes. I think it was someone who stood up when everyone else stayed seated. She looked away, uncomfortable with the weight of the words. Praise still felt like something she hadn't earned, even after everything. "I didn't stand for courage," she said quietly. "I stood because I couldn't watch it end like that." Donovan nodded. "Most honest reasons are like that." Outside the hangar, the sound of rotor blades grew louder. A training detachment had arrived earlier that morning. Young pilots, fresh uniforms, eager posture, eyes sharp with ambition they hadn't yet learned to temper. They passed the hangar in small groups, glancing inside, drawn by the damaged aircraft like gravity. One of them slowed, staring openly at Widow 13. "Is that the jet from Merwa's Ridge?" he asked no one in particular. Mara answered without turning, "It is." The young pilot hesitated, then stepped closer. "They say whoever flew her that night shouldn't have survived." Mara finally faced him. Her expression was calm, measured. "Survival isn't about what should happen," she said. "It's about what you refuse to give up on." He absorbed that, nodding slowly as if filing it away for later, when he'd need it. That afternoon, Mara found herself on the range, not as an instructor, not officially. She stood beside the trainees instead of in front of them. She listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, it was softly. "You'll train for precision," she told them, "for checklists, for perfect conditions." They nodded, attentive. "But when everything breaks," she continued, "what you have left is calm. If you don't learn that part, the rest won't save you." One of the trainees raised a hand. "What do you call that, ma'am?" She thought for a moment, then said, "Survival taught right." The phrase stayed with them. It stayed with her too. Later, as the sun dipped toward the ridgeline, Mara walked the runway alone. The scars in the concrete were still visible, dark lines cutting through repaired stone. She followed them with her eyes, step by step, until they ended beneath the repaired hangar. The desert wind tugged at her sleeves, carrying the faint smell of jet fuel and dust. Familiar, grounding. She stopped beside Widow 13 one last time. The aircraft was quiet now. No heat, no urgency, just metal and memory. Mara rested her palm against the fuselage, feeling the cool surface beneath her skin. "Still flying," she whispered. Not because the engines were running, but because what had mattered still moved forward. Behind her, life continued. Radios crackled. Laughter drifted from somewhere near the barracks. The base was alive in the way places only become after surviving something together. Mara turned away from the aircraft and walked toward the horizon, her shadow stretching long across the runway in the fading light. She didn't look back. Some stories don't need witnesses. They live in quieter places, in scars left untouched, in names never written, in moments when dignity doesn't announce itself. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.